Making firewood with axes. How do you do it and why? In this video I'm gonna try and answer those questions. First, let's start with the why. In a modern time full of petrol-powered engines and machines like chainsaws and firewood processors, isn't it more efficient making your firewood using those types of equipment? Well, sure it is, especially if you're doing it on a grand scale, perhaps even on a commercial scale. But if you are in a more modest type of homesteading situation and have access to a bit of forest land, then it's not a bad thing learning how to use basic tools, set them up, keep them sharp, and how to work with them. You actually save quite a lot of money not having to buy those machines. A couple of good axes you can find on the second-hand market. Renovate them if necessary, or even if you buy them brand new, it's a lot cheaper than buying a new chainsaw and a firewood processor. So if you're not in the need to make a whole lot of firewood, then you can get by pretty nicely with just your own body and an axe or two. Then you pay with your time and your labor instead of paying with a lot of money. But I'm not saying you should ditch your machines. I have a chainsaw, I use it sometimes. Depends on what type of trees I'm felling, really. I usually prefer to use the axes. I prefer it more and more the more I do it. I start up my chainsaw less and less over time. It's good to have it as a backup, of course, but I think it's really good having a couple of good axes and not having to rely on machines that need constant refill of oil and petrol and spark plugs and chains or whatever. And that's a good thing. That increases the level of self-sufficiency, I think. So if you are in an off-grid situation, you should definitely use axes and other hand tools more, I think. If you want to be self-sufficient, then you should hone your physical skills instead of relying on suppliers that allow you to run your machines that do the work for you. Use traditional tools and techniques and learn how to do the work with your own body instead. Develop some eye-to-hand techniques and get some exercise. Use your body a bit. You don't really get much exercise using machines for firewood processing. Sure, using a chainsaw there is some physical work involved. I'll admit to that, but when you're working with a firewood processor, not so much. You stand pretty stationary, pull a lever or two, and you don't really have to develop much skill to do that. But using an axe, you have to hone your physical abilities. And to me, that increases my sense of self-worth. I feel a lot better about myself when I can fell and process a tree with an axe than I do felling it with a chainsaw and splitting it with a machine. Then there is also the aspect of the Axe Cordwood challenge, if you are interested in that. I came across it a year ago. That was started in 2017, I think, or was it 2018, by Steven Edholm, who runs the YouTube channel Skill Cult. He has a web page as well, I think. That's a nice little community for people who want to learn how to use axes for chopping firewood, felling trees, bucking and splitting. Some people who have gotten into that, they do it as a sport. They like to chop big trees just to test themselves and raise their ability further and further, like any type of sport or exercise really. Instead of going to the gym, lifting heavier and heavier weights, they chop bigger and bigger trees. I'm not so much into that. I think it's a good thing though to be able to handle larger tools and trees, but I look at it mostly from a homesteading, self-reliance perspective. I'm usually felling reasonably sized trees that I can split efficiently and make into firewood without too much work. If the trees get too big, I don't think it's reasonable from a homesteading point of view anyway to take them down for firewood. And every time I see a big tree, I really look at it as a possible source for lumber, not firewood. I rarely go over 8 or 9 inches in diameter, and usually a bit smaller as well. Around 6 inches diameter, that's pretty convenient, I think. Then you can fell and chop it up quickly. And if you put a couple of hours in, a couple of days a week, you fill up your firewood shed before winter arrives. Depends on how much firewood you need, of course. You'll have to be the judge yourself if you can make all your firewood this way, or if you just want to do it as part of the process and use machines for the rest of it. But no matter how much you choose to do, I definitely recommend trying it out and see if you can benefit from it, and see if you feel more self-reliant and if you enjoy it. Because I enjoy it as well. It's not just saving money and being self-reliant. It's also being out in the woods enjoying the work. Not having to wear lots of protective gear and ear protection, and I'd much rather listen to the axe chop and the birds in the trees. I usually get harassed by woodpeckers when I'm out here. They usually raise the forest alarm pretty quickly when they realize I'm out working. Cranes have been flying in now since spring is arriving. You miss out a little bit on that, I think, if you wear ear protection and run a two-stroke engine. But you don't have to choose this or the other. You can combine them. I do myself. Big spruces, especially dead ones, since we have lots of problems with bark beetles here, pine borers or whatever they are called in English. They kill the spruces and then they dry up, and it's not so efficient cutting down dead, dry trees with axes. That's a better situation to use a saw. And if the diameter is big, which they sometimes are on those spruces, I don't think it's practical using an axe for that. But as I do now, chopping down modest-sized birch trees, which is the main species we use for firewood in Sweden, you get along fine with a felling axe and a boy's axe. I do most of it with a felling axe now, actually. So you decide how you want to do it, but I do recommend you try it out anyway. I don't think you'll regret it. Anyway, that's my take on why. Now let's go on to the how. When felling trees with axes, you get a natural lean and cut. And there's no problem maintaining a secure hinge wood in the middle of the trunk as you do when you fell with chainsaws using an axe. Now I have a video on my channel where I talk a bit more about that if you want to watch that later. I'll put a link to it up here. Time to process the tree now that it's on the ground. And I'm using a method called bucksplitting. And I'm gonna explain that a little bit before I start. The most common way to buck a log for firewood is to cut it into short rounds and split them afterwards, making V-notches like that. Split off a section and then move on and make another section. But when doing the bucksplitting, you induce a crack first in the trunk, and then you chop off firewood pieces directly from the trunk. And I think it's both efficient and fun if the trees aren't too big. If the diameter is too big, then it's not really a practical technique. But then again, I don't find it practical using too big trees for firewood, as I spoke about earlier. Sometimes I have to do the V-notches on the lower part of the trunk. In this case, for instance, this is a slightly older birch. You can see that from the thick and rough bark. That probably means that the grain at the bottom is a bit stringy and problematic, so it won't pop off as easily as further up the trunk. Then I might have to do some V-notches to get the first pieces off. But after that, it should be pretty straightforward. It usually is. You can also see by the rot that's starting to get hold in the center of the tree that it's an older birch. They usually start to rot and then they fall down and are totally useless for anything. Well, for humans at least. The fungi and the bugs and the birds, they like them still when they are in that state. But for us, we can perhaps harvest some birch bark, but that's about it. So I try to take those older birches down before they become useless for lumber or firewood. Anyway, I'm gonna start splitting it from the bottom and see if I can pop the first pieces off, and you'll see how it works. The axe I'm using is an old Hultsbruk that I found at the flea market for almost no money at all. put it on a suitable handle, about 32 inches long. The head weight is about 3.3 pounds. And it's the cheeks are thicker in the middle and slightly thinner on the top and bottom. That prevents sticking. The edge bevel is about 22.5 degrees. I can probably more or less shave myself with it. That works great, usually. Let's see if it does now as well. Start in the crack in the middle. I put a mark on the handle so I know how long pieces I chop off. Cutting at about 45 degrees down towards the end of the trunk. And there's the first piece. Yeah, as expected, it's a bit stringy here at the bottom. But it will come off eventually. If I find they are a bit big, I just lean them against the log and split them like that. On smaller diameters, I could switch and start chopping on the other side at once, but this is, I didn't really measure it. Yeah, a 9-inch diameter tree. So I think I need to put a second crack here before I go from the other side. Yeah, splits rather nicely, although it's stringy grain. That's a good crack. You have to be very mindful of how the axe would travel if you were to miss, so you don't cut your foot off or something. So when most of it is off, I start chopping to the side and not between my feet. For the first pieces I stood with a pretty wide stance, cutting so the axe would travel between my legs if it would pass over the log. Now when there's not much left for the first section, I stand a bit to the side and I cut to the side of myself. Much safer that way. That last piece is laying in direct contact to the ground, so I'm not gonna do that now, because I don't want to hit the dirt with my axe. So I'm moving up to the next section, making a crack again. Let's talk about inducing the crack a bit. It can be very tempting hitting the end of the log straight on to crack it. But the problem is that with this technique you have bevels on both sides of that end. And if you don't hit in the center, it's very easy for the axe to glance off. There's a good chance you have your feet there, or your chins. So what I prefer to do is to crack the log from the top, cutting down like that, because then there is no real danger hitting my feet. If I miss totally and it glances off, it goes into the ground, which I prefer not to do, dulling my axe. But it's a lot better than cutting your feet or shins. A dull axe you can fix with a file and a sharpening stone. If you hit your foot, it's a much bigger problem. So for safety reasons, I don't really stand up close to the end and cut like that anymore at all. I stand back and cut down. And I do recommend doing it like that if you want to try this. I sometimes find it helps to put a horizontal crack in the log, especially in a case like this, when I popped off a piece from the first side and the main bulk of the trunk is left on this side. So if I put the horizontal crack here, it's pretty easy cutting from above and getting the next piece off. I guess that's sort of a crack. Yeah, who doesn't need some kindling, right? I'm getting a bit close to the ground here again, so I'm leaving it and moving for next section. That's why it's better to stand back so you don't have your feet in the way. A lot of rot has to stop somewhere. I'm gonna work myself up the trunk a bit to do some comparison between the bottom part and how it behaves further up, where the grain is probably straighter and the rot is less present. So I'll see you in a bit. I started placing the cracks on a diagonal orientation. Round one from this side. When I pop those pieces off, I do one from that side. That works nice, since I'm leaving the part closest to the ground anyway. They pop off easier up here. Still some rot left, especially where branches have been falling off. But it's getting better and better the further up I go. This technique, as far as I know, was pioneered by a French guy called the Bald Motelier. He has a YouTube channel called Theo Bald. He is also a Rinaldi dealer. I have a couple of Rinaldi axes. Been chatting with him a bit for that reason. Very nice guy. And then there is the veteran timberman in Alaska, Glenn Urquhart, who is doing a fair amount of bucksplitting. He and I have also been discussing it a lot. And because of his many years of experience as a forestman, he's giving me quite a lot of useful tips. And because of that, and my experience from last year, my technique has improved quite a lot for this season, I think. I've also been doing quite a lot of hewing at my survival camp. That also comes into play when doing bucksplitting, I think. All sorts of craftsmanship and axe work, they connect to each other. And I think that's a very nice thing. Occasionally I want to pop off a little bit more on the piece I left, and then I chop from both ends to get a piece out from the middle of the trunk. I think I saw Thibaud do that the first time. I think it's a useful technique. If the wood splits properly, that is, this birch doesn't really want to cooperate to 100%. I think it has a bit to do with the rot inside of it. Not sure if this is going to be the best quality firewood. Birch is very sensitive to these things if you trap moisture inside them. I don't know of any other species of tree that has a totally waterproof bark on the outside, but birches do. And if that starts trapping moisture inside them, especially when you fell them, the wood inside of the trunk starts to break down very quickly. Slime accumulates in the capillary system, and that will never dry out. So if you can't buck and split the birch really quickly when you fell it, you should at least take strips of bark off of the trunk so the water has somewhere to evaporate to. Otherwise it's useless felling them. On this occasion the rot was in the tree before it was felled. I guess the situation is a bit similar. I'm not sure if this will ever dry out properly, but it'll probably burn. Perhaps just not as efficient as better firewood. I'll chop it and dry it anyway. This is more or less a hewing technique, but it works for splitting off firewood from the trunk as well. This black spot is probably where water has entered the trunk and started rotting it out from the inside. There's probably been a branch here that rotted and fell off. Not quite sure why they are so prone to rot, these birches, but they just are. They don't live that long. You find the birch that's 200 years old, that's sort of ancient compared to pine trees that can be 500 years old and still be in good shape, not to mention oak trees. So there's no reason being sentimental about this particular type of birch species. There are several. Not sure what this is called in English. In Swedish we call it vårtbjörk, and that rots easily. So I try to get the oldest ones down for firewood before they are damaged. You see, you have to be aware of where the axe travels if it glances. You have your legs nowhere near. And if you are doing some sketchy chopping, you don't feel 100% safe, Don't use excessive force. You always have a strong and a weak side when you work with an axe. So I try to switch between left and right hand grip. I am naturally right-handed, but for some reason I have always been more comfortable swinging it like a lefty with my left hand up towards the head and my right hand at the palm swell. But I switch between those grips, trying to plan my work so if I need to cut with excessive force and maintain as much control as possible, I'm gripping it with my strong side. The more I practice, the more I can use it to the same amount of force and control, gripping it both ways. But that's something you should consider if you're used to holding your axe in just one way. Try switching it around so you can work from both sides of the log, and you have to adapt to the environment. I'm coming up to a pine tree here. I managed to fell it so it rests right against it, so that's one of the factors that dictates how you grip your axe and how you do your chopping, and you need to be able to swing it both ways. I'm speaking about these things as I am a real expert that's been doing this my entire life. Truth is, I haven't been using axes for this purpose for that long, couple of years. Been a craftsman more or less my entire life, so I have some advantage there of using hand tools, but I'm not really a super experienced axe wielder. But just practicing it carefully, talking to more experienced people, you learn quickly. You don't really have to go more than 1 or 2 generations back in time before you see that this sort of work was very common. Everybody on the countryside, at least, was supposed to know how to do it. It's just common knowledge, everyday work. So you pick it up quickly if you source the information on how to do it, rid yourself of mythical opinions and romanticized ideas. Axe brands, that's one of those things, I think. Even though I am from Sweden, I only own one axe from Gränsfors Bruk, and that's a broad axe I use for hewing. I don't have any of their other axes. I prefer the old vintage axes that we can find. Or brand new ones as Hultafors axes, they are pretty good. Don't cost as much as Gränsfors axes either. Not as pretty to look at perhaps, but as working tools they are just as good. You shouldn't be fooled by glorification on certain brands. On the other hand, the most important thing is you get tools that you like, enjoy using, can do good work with, and it's just your own preferences that dictate where you get them, really. But you can find a lot of really good axes on the flea markets or the second-hand market. Buying a brand new one that's sharpened and honed to the point where you can shave yourself with it, that's nice of course, but I would probably recommend getting old ones that you have to replace the handle on, and change the edge bevel and sharpen it, because you need to know how to do these things anyway if you're going to work with them. So you might as well get old tools and renovate them. You can get new tools as well, of course. Same thing with this as with the question of hand tools and machines. One doesn't exclude the other. But you shouldn't only rely on new things that somebody else has set up for you. Better to start with old things and learn how to take care of them first. Then you can treat yourself with a brand new, really nice top of the line axe. Should we talk about handles too? Well, we could. That probably means we should. The length of the handle on this one that I'm using as a felling axe is 32 inches or 80 centimeters. That works pretty well for chopping as well, to a certain point where I get further up the top, where it's a bit too long and cumbersome. Then I switch to my lighter boy's axe. That has a head weight of 2.6 pounds, I think, about 1200 grams. 26-inch handle on that one, about 65 centimeters. And when you get new axes or new handles today, first thing you have to do is to thin them down so they work properly, because every new axe handle you can find today is too thick. They don't flex as they should, which means shock travels up through the handle and into your joints, and you damage yourself pretty quickly. I've been watching quite a lot of Ben Scott's videos on YouTube. He's been talking a lot about how to thin out handles. Well, Steven Edholm has also spoken about that, of course. You know, Skill Cult, founder of Axe Cordwood challenge I mentioned before. If you look at vintage handles, they are a lot slimmer. They flex when you work with them. New handles, they are like baseball bats, some of them. Ben had some theories about the reasons behind it. I think it was him at least. One reason would be that people nowadays don't really know how to use axes. And they use them mainly to split firewood at their vacation houses. So they miss and cut in front of the fire log, hit it with the handle, and they break it eventually. Or right away if they are really unlucky. The other reason might be the production of handles. They're mass produced in one part of the world, shipped to another part of the world. Moisture and temperature conditions vary during the transit, and if they are thicker, they stay more stable, which means less returns. Might be a reason as well. But no matter what the reason, if you want to work properly with an axe, have the right type of balance and not causing damage to yourself, you have to thin it out. I think Ben mentioned somewhere in a Facebook comment, I think it was, or maybe a YouTube comment, the dimensions he has seen on vintage handles when he's been looking at them. I think it was, well, where you grip it, they get bigger up here of course. 38 by 22 millimeters or something. You can easily test it when you've thinned it down. Just chop it down real hard in a block of wood and push it from side to side and see if the handle flexes a bit or if it's too stiff. But that's something you have to be aware of if you're going to use axes. There might be a macho thing to it as well. Certain types of men preferably buy axes nowadays, and they want a big fat handle because it feels strong and reliant to them. But it's wrong. That's just a tool that's not properly set up yet. When you bought axes in the past, you were supposed to file and sharpen the axe yourself. You have to look at the handles in that way nowadays when you get a new handle or a new axe. It's not ready to use when you get it. You have to set it up yourself so it works. If you have any thoughts or knowledge or experience about these things, don't feel afraid to put your comments down. Anyway, back to the processing. See you later. It's a bit of a sketchy situation close to a tree like this, but I can easily reach that point where I need to pop it off, so I can probably do that. No problem. That's one more. This is one of the situations where it helps to have a slightly heavier axe. Can't really cut with a lot of force so close to a tree, so I can hold back a bit and let the head weight work a bit more for me. Then I get it off safely. Splits very nicely now that I'm a bit further up the tree. There's some more rot inside of it here. Has to be a big branch that's been sitting somewhere close to this area. It's a bit tricky inducing a crack from this end now with this pine tree in the way. Can't really get to it in a good way. But I saw some videos that Glenn Urquhart shot during the winter 2 years ago, I think it was, when he was chopping frozen aspen, and he popped the pieces off easily without making a crack. I'm gonna try that here as well, even though we are nowhere near freezing temperatures, but maybe it will work anyway. I'm chopping with my weak side now, but I don't need to use that much force with a heavier head. That's a pass, I would say. Worked. It's a bit of the same situation. There's not much room swinging the axe here, but just a little bit of crack. That should do it. I'm 6 meters up the trunk now. I think that's about 20 feet. Now it might be tempting to sever it here and move it, turn it, process the rest of it. But I prefer not to do that. I prefer to leave it connected to the top where all the branches are, because then it stays put when I chop it. I might have to do it in the end anyway, but it's usually tricky dealing with a short piece like that when it's like 3 or 4 or 5 log pieces left on it. A bit difficult keeping it stationary when you're chopping. So try working with it connected to the rest of the tree as much as possible. It's probably light enough down there so I could lift it and put a sleeper log under it, so I can chop the rest of it without hitting the ground. I actually had some damage to the axe here, even though I haven't really hit the ground up here. Sharp, sharp, sharp. Nicked. I think what happened is that dirt and gravel was lodged in the coarse bark down close to the root. So when I felled it, I hit that. So it would probably be a good idea to have a beater axe and remove the bark, especially on an old birch with that thick coarse bark as this one, before using your nicer, sharper axes. But not a big problem. I mean, most part of the edge is still nice and sharp. Birch is also pretty soft, so even if I had more nicks I could continue processing it, but The more damage you get, of course, the more difficult it becomes chopping wood. But that's something to consider if you do a lot of felling of old birches and other trees with coarse bark. Just have an extra axe that you're not afraid using in those areas, and remove the bark with that first. Another rotten branch, coffee colored. I didn't bring any coffee today. It's typical. Just like when hewing, it's of course easy to pop the pieces off if you place your cuts on the branches, or cut them out with a V-notch first. But it works with the branch in the middle of the piece eventually. I'm going to try and prop it up down at the bottom and see if I can chop up this piece up to where I stopped now before I continue. It's light enough to handle now. Yes, we have accumulated quite a pile of firewood here, I'd say. Works a bit slower when I'm shooting, but I guess, have I been here 2 hours, if even that? This would probably be an hour's work without the camera, at a slow and comfortable pace. So it's totally reasonable making firewood like that, wouldn't you say? I think so, at least. When you just get the hang of it, you work yourself up a tree pretty quickly. Nice way to get some exercise as well, getting out in the woods, listening to the birds. Maybe you notice now I am chopping on the side of my feet, not in between them. so I have control of where the axe goes when the log is severed, so I'm not in the way for it. Bonus. I don't really have to measure the length of the logs now. I can just look at my previous cuts and match those. Let's take a moment to consider the amount of waste produced by the bucksplitting technique. Normally, if you buck the log with V-notches, you get a huge amount of big chips. Smaller and smaller the further into the bottom of the notch you get. With this technique, well, I have a little bit of small chips, mostly because I don't hit my mark exactly all the time. But the better you get, the more accurate you hit, the less of these chips you get. For a pile this big, I don't think it's a huge amount of waste, really. I know that some people that cut V-notches, they collect the chips as well. If you buck large logs, you get large chips, you can definitely use them for firewood, no problem. But the thing is, using reasonably sized trees for firewood with a bucksplitting technique, you don't really have to collect anything. This is so little waste, there's no problem at all leaving it. So that's also a reason that I like the bucksplitting method. So now the top is left, getting thinner pretty quickly. I can probably make firewood of it almost all the way up to the top if I want to. So let's continue with that, shall we? think I'm gonna sever it here now. Pull it down to the firewood pile and cut the rest of it up there. So I don't have to toss the pieces so far. It just means I have to pick them up and toss them again because I hit trees and I don't toss them far enough. So I'm gonna do that, see if I can keep it stable while I chop the rest of it up. Then I'll do the top. I'm almost chopping into the ground now. I don't like that. But since I have some nicks on the toe anyway, I need to take a file to it when I come home. So hitting a little bit more dirt before that isn't that big of a deal. Yeah. There's firewood all over the place here now since I couldn't reach the main pile when I tossed them. So, yeah. Better to pull it down here and finish it here. I'm gonna pull down the top now and finish that. So now I'm switching from my felling axe to my lighter and shorter boy's axe. When I have a natural block, why not use it? That's a lovely rot again. I think it's quite enjoyable doing the tops after the heavier work on the main trunk. Apart from a nice idea of using as much of the tree as possible, it's nice to finish with some light work. This is an idea I got from Glen Urquhart with smaller pieces of tops or bigger branches. You don't really have to split them. It's enough to crack them. Then they will dry out and you have one piece to handle instead of two small flimsy ones. There, cracked, but intact. There, that's a reasonable amount of firewood for a couple of hours work, I think. That's also one tree challenge accomplished. That's a mini challenge from the Axe Cordwood challenge. If you haven't heard of it, I know a few of you who watch my channel have and participate. Go check it out. It's really fun and educational and useful, well, for people like me at least. Now I'm just gonna stack it and see how much it is. Okay, let's see what we actually have here then. It's pretty much 8 feet long, 2.4 meters. And it's 1.5 foot tall. It's about the same all the way. It's between 50 and 60 centimeters. So it's about a quarter of a rick, a little bit more perhaps. If you're not familiar with those measurements, which I wasn't when I started the Cordwood challenge last year, since we don't measure in ricks and cords in Sweden, we measure in cubic meters, but a rick is 8 feet long and 4 feet high. The length of the logs isn't important when you are talking about ricks. But I make mine around 35 centimeters long, that's 14 inches. A bit longer sometimes, a bit shorter sometimes, but around that. And the cord is also 4 feet wide. You can do that with 3 rows or 3 ricks of fire logs, depending on the length of them. Maybe you'll need to do 4. Or just stack them any way you want and just measure the total volume of it, as I understand it. So anyway, 1 tree challenge, felled, bucked, split, stacked, quarter of a rick. Pretty happy with that. 9 inches at the bottom where I made the felling cut. It was about 20 meters tall, I think, around that. I used almost the entire tree. I left a few branches, but used as much as possible. Even got some stove wood out of it in the end. Could have done a little bit more, but I decided not to. Yeah, it's a good day's work. I stacked the firewood on some branches to get it up from the ground and the moisture. with the bark side down all the way up to the last row where I put the bark side up as a rain cover. I'm gonna keep adding to this so I get the full rick, and then I will probably do 2 or at least 2, probably up to 3 rows on the top with the bark side up, and then I'll leave it here for the summer and bring it home in the autumn. There are some more birches in this area that are also attacked by rot, so I can definitely fell 1 or 2 more here. At least 2, maybe 3 it will take to get the full rick. So I keep adding on to it. Not sure if I'm gonna shoot any more firewood videos this season. I'm pretty busy working on the survival camp. But I thought I'd do at least one proper video where I talk about the bucksplitting technique and the Axe Cordwood challenge. How you do it when you make firewood with axes only, and why you should. Now it's up to you to decide if it's for you or not. I hope it is. Participate in the challenge, it's great fun. I'm accompanied by a bumblebee. Spring has arrived. You're gonna move into my firewood stack, are you? Yeah, feel free. I'm not gonna use it until autumn anyway. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and come back for my next video. Until then, take care.